Hi boys and girls, it's Miss Josephine. Welcome to my library. I'm so very glad you're here. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you a fairy tale. That's why I'm dressed like a fairy. Also, because I'm wearing a costume for Halloween. On Halloween, I decided to share with you a very dark and creepy fairy tale. So, I don't want to make light of this. Fairy tales are often charming and friendly and fun to read, but some of the fairy tales are not at all. They're dark, they're cruel, they're gruesome. They feature evil characters, powerful witches, horrible stepmothers, giant ogres, witches who want to eat children, betrayal. All kinds of horrible themes can be found in fairy tales. The one that I'm going to share with you today was collected by the Grimm's brothers. It's a Grimm's tale. We think of Grimm's fairy tales, but you might want to know they're called Grimm's fairy tales, not certainly because they're Grimm, but because they were collected by two brothers, Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm. This is a book about them. Since it's a book about two people who really existed, it's called a biography. So Jakob and Wilhelm, more than 200 years ago, rode their horses around France and Germany and Austria, some northern European countries, and talked to the people in the countryside and wrote down and collected their stories. These were stories that had never been written down, that had just been passed down from parents to children for hundreds and hundreds of years until, the whole area of a country might have known the very same tale with a little bit of difference between one and the other. And they collected over 300. The one I'm going to share with you today is called the Juniper Tree. And the Juniper Tree is often, when you buy a collection of Grimm's fairy tales, it's often left right out. And it's left out because it is so crazy creepy and dark. But this is one of my favorite collections of fairy tales, and I have very many of them. It's one of the largest sections in my personal library because I like fairy tales so much. Interestingly, I don't like being scared. I don't like scary movies. I won't watch them. I don't like, gore and horror. And yet, this fairy tale, The Juniper Tree, which is left out of most, is the cover story for this collection of fairy tales by Laura Siegel, and it's featured, as the top fairy tale, because even though it's dark and gruesome and creepy, it has some safety in it for us. The safety in all fairy tales is that evil is punished and good is rewarded. And if I ask you, is the ending going to be happy or sad? I think you probably know the answer. Yeah, the ending is going to be happy. But before we get to that ending, we're going to have to go to some very shockingly dark places. So parents, if you're listening, and children, if you're listening, if you don't want that in your head, and I wouldn't blame you if you don't, then don't watch this video that I'm going to post for you. I usually read it to children only. Well, it's a special story I read only to 5th graders. And there's a little creepy song in it, though, that they would go home and share the story with their families. And sometimes I would hear 1st graders or 2nd graders singing the horrifying and creepy little song that is in this story. So I hope that's enough of a warning for you that if you don't like that sort of thing, don't listen to the story that I'm going to share with you, The Juniper Tree. But I want to say some things about it that are good. It's really powerful. It's magical. It takes place in once upon a time. So the world that we're going to be entering doesn't look like our world at all. It doesn't feel like our world at all. So it's not like you feel the same sort of scared that you might feel if somebody told you something true and scary about the world you live in. That's the kind of scary I don't like. But this is imagination scary. It's not like something you think could ever happen to you. So I like that about it. Like stories that were told and passed down from, parent to child for hundreds of years, it got passed down because children wanted to hear it again and again and again. And then they memorized it so that when they had children, they could tell it to their children. So it has that kind of staying power. It has that kind of magic, even though the magic in this is dark magic. And of course, happily, evil will be punished. And the evil comes in the form of a wicked stepmother. So I want to say something about wicked stepmothers. The last thing I want to say, it's something called a familiar trope. That's a familiar trope. I want you to remember that, because if you can say, that's a familiar trope, you will sound very smart. A familiar trope is a storyline that we expect. We kind of know what's going to happen on some level. We say, oh, we see that again and again and again. You can guess that when there's a stepmother in a fairy tale, right? She's going to be evil, and that's a familiar trope. But why were stepmothers evil in all those old stories? I myself am a stepmother, and I'm not in the least bit evil. Yeah, I'm maybe naughty a little bit, but I'm never evil. I'm never unkind. And wicked stepmothers are cruel. And the reason for that was these hundreds of years ago when these stories were written, the family home, especially if it were a castle or, something that a noble family would have, or a family that had wealth or land, only one child would inherit it. And that would always be the first child. Typically a boy. Usually girls weren't allowed to inherit in those days, hundreds of years ago. So only one child would get everything. So if the mother of that first child died, which happens in fairy tales a lot, the mother that would come in would be, if she had a child of her own, a stepmother to that first child, and that would mean her child would get nothing. And that child that was there would get everything. So because of those strange inheritance laws of who got what, the imagination went to the idea that that first child was always in the way of the second child, the child of the stepmother. And therefore, the stepmother might want to get rid of that child. That's a dark and creepy thought, and that's what happens in many fairy tales, and that's certainly what's going to happen in the Juniper Tree. So, when you join me for the next video, I will read to you the Juniper Tree, told by hundreds and hundreds and probably thousands of people, and collected by the brothers Jacob and William, or Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. See you soon.